Now, instance variables. We've talked about classes, constructors, methods. Now we have to talk about how we define and create our instance variables. And we've already sort of seen this in our design, in our UML class card. Did you notice the character that our instance variables start with? All of our instance variables so far have started with an underscore. All instance variables should start with an underscore. This, I need to be clear, is a coding standard, not a syntactical requirement. What I mean by this is if you define a variable that doesn't have that leading underscore, the interpreter will not burp, right? This is not a hard requirement. It would not be like if you decide to define a function without def at the beginning, right? That would cause the interpreter to break. This will not. Interpreter runs totally fine without that underscore. So why? Why am I so hardcore about this? And I will be hardcore about this. Why am I so hardcore about this? We've talked a little bit already about encapsulation, information hiding, not touching things that are privately hidden internal structures. Well, Python doesn't have any sort of visibility modifier. So there's no hard way to enforce visibility. In a language like Java or C#, you would declare public int count, right? And remember when we, oh, that looks ugly. Remember when we talked at the beginning about object-oriented programming, and we said that the way you access internal state is you either communicate via message passing, i.e. a method, or you are given explicit permission to look at and or touch a instance variable or the state itself, right? In Java and C# and many other languages with public-private visibility modifiers, this keyword here, public, is how you express that permission. You have given someone permission to look at and touch count. Conversely, you might say private double limit. And this says, hey, we're going to create a variable called limit, and its type is going to be a double, which is a double precision floating point value, and it's private. So I cannot touch limit, cannot touch it without going through some sort of publicly visible interface. Now, the object itself is not beholden to that. Right? The object can touch any of its internally hidden aspects. Right? So when you define the class, you can refer to limit without any problem. But any external object, any external structure, code, whatever, cannot directly interact with the limit variable. It has to use getters and setters to get there. There's actually a third one. The thing about visibility modifiers in Java and C# is that private variables are not inherited. So there's a third one called protected, which is private for the sake of visibility, but public for the sake of inheritance. So it does get inherited, but it remains private. Okay. So Again, why? That's great, Professor Gray. It's wonderful. If I'm ever at the world's nerdiest pub trivia, I'm going to be awesome. But why the underscore? The underscore represents aspects of an object or class which you are not allowed to directly manipulate. It represents private information, encapsulated information. So going back to our code example, right? That variable would be labeled underscore code, as opposed to count would just be called count. If we want it to be public, if we want people to be able to access it, works better if you spell properly. You could just put count. Okay. And there's another aspect to creating instance variables, right? It's that self thing. We need to put self in front. We need to associate it with the object. Self.count. Self.code. Right? Remember, self represents the object. So putting self first associates this variable now with whatever object self represents. So our code, right, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, we'd put an underscore in front because we don't want people to touch that. And this is why, right? This is our publicly agreed upon interface, is anything that doesn't have that underscore in front. So the idea is you do not want to let users manipulate this directly, right? The problem is we can't prevent them in Python. And I'll show you in a minute what that looks like and why, and how that's useful when we're testing. But understand that designing your objects so that those instance variables are accessed directly, or writing code that directly accesses underlying hidden instance variables is bad implementation and will be considered such. Yes, I understand that Python does it all the time. I do. But remember, I'm teaching you object-oriented programming through Python, not for Python. I want, you guys are computer science majors almost exclusively. And so I want you to understand the larger concepts around programming and how to do it in other contexts, right? These concepts all do translate.